Okay, on chapter 4b, we have part 2. Remember, just to quickly review, cursors, declaring variables, %rowtype, %type, and declare. Although I'll give you some examples of %rowtype, probably %type is the model I'd probably like you to use. Okay, so now this is in the begin block, and what we're going to start talking about is fetching information out of this array. So now this is initially starting using rowtype. Okay, so loops using rowtype, %rowtype. So systematically executes the program statements. That's what this loop will do, and then periodically evaluates in exit condition. So usually, if there's no data left within the cursor, that it'll go ahead and bump out to the end of the program. Now this is in the begin block. Okay, and then the end of the begin block. Now, open cursor, so you always have to open a cursor. The cursor will initially put information into this memory array and then close it. So with the begin block, or the execution piece of this, you have to open the cursor, and then you need to start looping at this point. So yeah, start the loop, and that means it'll just continue. The loop will continue until you run out of data, essentially. At this point, you need to fetch all of this information one record at a time, first come, first serve, from ccursor. So fetch ccursor into this memory variable. It's called location row. Remember, we defined location row right here. So location row, we've defined the variable, and to pull the information from ccursor and %rowtype, meaning pull all the attributes of each one of these fields. So into location row. Now this point says exit when ccursor or no information is found. And this is the syntax for putting this together. We want to say customer name, for instance, equals, now location row, that's defining this particular variable, or this particular memory array, if you will. Remember, we defined location row here. We can call it whatever we want. Location row dot C first. So remember the syntax for pulling information from a table. Oftentimes table dot field, customer dot C last, for instance. This is similar in that you have basically an ad hoc table. You can think of it that way in memory, called location row. And you want to pull this table, location row dot C first, and then location row dot C last. And then, of course, I have abbreviated customer name here. The actual variable's current customer name. The actual variable's current customer name, I just abbreviated that here so I could get this on one row. And then and that'll go ahead and print. And that'll keep printing out every one of these records until there's no data left. Now, here, the next slide, some additional parts. You'll need this, and I think questions 3 and 4, or 3 anyway. That you can also run these if-then statements, and that's on page 20, from within your loops. So you fetch the information, just like, and in this case, we're using a %type to define our variables, rather than location row. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Now exit when ccursor not found. Okay. Now if order total in this case is greater than or equal to 200, then do this. Else it's just going to bump out. Okay, so that's how that if-then statement works. If something, and you can use the Boolean expressions, the arithmetic expressions, greater than or equal to 200 in this case, then do this. Okay, so that's just simply your if-then. If this, then something, if then, else it just bumps out. Okay, now in this case we are resetting a discount price to 0, so that every time order minus order total times 2%, 2.2 happens, which is 2%, 20% happens, that discount will be reset to 0. Sometimes you'll have to do that for the next loop. Now the else if, the if-else if, maybe it's a little bit more flexible. So same thing's happening, looping, fetch the information, exit. Now if order total is greater than 200, then do this stuff. That's fine, no problem, we've already done that. But else if, so if the first condition isn't true, then it's going to look at the second condition. Else if, now notice the spelling, ELSIF. Order total is greater than 100, then do something else. And then if it doesn't match, if the data or condition doesn't match the first or the second, it just bumps out then. Okay, so and if, notice the syntax of and if. Then we're doing the very same thing here. We're just setting discount to 0. We're printing this stuff out. Okay, now putting it all together here using rowtype. So just to walk you through it, let's see what's on the next one. Okay, just to walk you through it. So we have declare C cursors, that name of that cursor. All of this information, that output, is going to go into a memory array called C cursor, basically. Location row is another variable, and this information is going to be from the array is going to be dropped into this as we use that in our begin block. Then of course we have to define current customer name. That's a variable outside of any of these tables. Since it's an additional variable, we need to define it as varchar 2 120 or appropriately. Now what we're doing here is in the begin block then is opening the cursor. We're just printing out header information here is all we're doing. And then starting the loop, fetching the information into location row. That's going to fetch this record by record as we loop. Whenever it exits, whenever there's no data, it's going to exit. And once again, we're just going current customer name equals, notice the equals, colon equals, location row, that's pulling from this array, and this variable, C underscore first, and then C last. And then we're putting that, we're also going to use a location row, row OID. I think the point there is that whatever your cursor pulls in from however many tables you're searching through, you can go ahead and define these various variables within this. We're going to end loop and close the cursor, and your output is going to look like this: the order number, and then Neil Graham and Sheila Lewis. Okay, so that's using rowtype. The next is using %type and field data types to do the very same thing. So we're going to go cursor, C cursor is in the declare section. Now, of course, I'm using a little bit different variables here. It's not an exact duplicate of the other model or other example. So we're selecting information, this information into C cursor from item and inventory. This is our whole select statement, but it's part of that cursor. Now, what we're doing here is saying env_id, and that's going to equal this variable. It is not that variable, but it's going to it equals that, so, and it matches it. That's why I've called it env_id. So it's defined as inventory.env_id, table.field, and then the %type is going to pull whatever data type, data definition is associated with this particular field. The same is going to happen for item description and inventory price. So what I'll just do at that point is begin, open the cursor, start the loop, fetch C cursor into env_id, item description, and inf price. These variables are these. Look at the color code. Are these. They are not necessarily they match the information that this information pulled. I just want to make the distinction between these are actual variables used within the program that information is dropped into. These variables, these field names are just that. They're field names, and information has been put into or pulled from those field names from the table and put into a memory array that basically matches this on sort of a slot basis. And then we're going to go ahead, fetch C cursor into env_id, item description, inventory price, and then work with those. Now, read through this too, because this is doing exactly the same thing as my discussion. On using field data types, the same thing, cursor, C cursor is, select inventory, env_id, the select statement's the same. Now, this is where it starts to vary. You still set up a variable called env_id, but in this case you define it as number 8. Looks just like your table when you set up a table, when you create the table. Okay, and that matches this description. in item description matches this one, in price matches this. Now the problem is, this is a better method because it's more flexible. This isn't flexible. Say your item description changes, or item description goes up to 50 within your database. This only says 30. Remember once again that you probably have this particular structure and you're probably using it for 10, 20, 30 different programs. And so item description might be in 10 or 20 or 30 different programs, and it's wrong. The data type, the data description is wrong. This one, using %type, will match whatever is listed in the table automatically. This one you would have to change. The rest of it's the same though. In the begin block you have open cursor, loops, fetching the information, and then when exit when done. Okay. The next video we'll talk about fetching. So this part, remember this part talked about a little bit about the looping, how to fetch information in as a general principle. Talked about your if-then statement that you'll use in problem 3, and if-else-if statements, and that structure to that, using row type within your PL/SQL program, and then using %type and field data types within your PL/SQL programs, and that this is more, %type is more flexible, and that defining those numbers, those specific data types, usually aren't as flexible. Okay, thank you.